Chapter 3 Spidrens and Meditation. Hedgehogs woke Dane as they wriggled into her bedroll, shaking in terror. It wasn't the controlled fear they felt around hunters, but the wild panic that made them run before a fire. She eased out of the covers. "It's all right," she whispered. "Stay here." She dragged on her clothes and boots. She felt it now, heaviness in the air and in her mind, not like the storm wings of the rabid bear, but there was a flavor in it that reminded her of the winged monsters. In the camp around her the men slept quietly, no snorers like Granda. Onawa was mumbling in her sleep. Tahoe was not with her or with the ponies. "Stay," Dane told Cloud, who wanted to follow. She fitted the string to her bow and checked its draw as she looked around. A light burned in the lioness's tent. The other one, where the man who'd been a hawk lay, was dark. The wood outside their camp was thick with fear. Tiny beasts dug as far into burrows as they could. The big ones were gone. An owl sitting overhead was almost mindless with terror. That was bad. Owls didn't scare. Tahoe sat at the edge of the trees, nose to the wind. When Dane rested a hand on his shoulder, the dog flinched. "What is it?" He knew only that it was bad, and that it was coming. "Stay with the ponies. Guard them." Tahoe whimpered a protest. Waiting for trouble to reach him was hard. Better to go hunt it out. "Go on." He obeyed, reluctantly. A sentry nearby raised a hand in greeting. Looking past him, Dane saw another. "Do you hear anything?" she asked. "I think something bad is coming. Something wrong." "I hear nothing." It was Hakim. He didn't take his eyes off the woods beyond. "Go back to your sleep." There was no sleeping, not now. Checking the ponies, Dane found they were afraid too. Beyond them the horses were alert, watching the trees like sentries. The warhorse pawed the air. He knew danger was close. Wanting to fight it, he pulled his tether to see if it could be yanked from the ground. "Not yet," she said, patting his withers. "Watch. Wait." She walked towards the forest. "Don't go alone." Dane wrenched around and lost her balance. A strong hand grabbed her elbow and raised her to her feet. It was the lioness, wearing a shirt, breeches, and boots. The red gem at her throat glowed steadily. A naked sword lay in her right hand. "Easy," the knight cautioned. "What brings you out here?" They walked to a small clearing almost 30 feet away. Dane took a deep breath and made herself calm down. "There's something close by that isn't right. I can't explain better than that." The lioness scanned the trees all around them. "I feel it too." She tapped her gem. "This warns me of trouble sometimes." "Look!" Her ma had said she had an owl's night sight. That was how she saw the rabbit in the clearing, when someone else would miss it. Kneeling to lift the body, she found it was still warm. White light, Alana's magic, appeared over her hands. The knight touched the body with a palm and felt its warmth, then touched the red drops at the rabbit's nose. She sniffed her fingers. "Blood?" Its heart burst. It was scared to death. Dane was sure of it. Gently she laid the dead creature atop a nearby stump. "There's something else, lioness. The big animals, there isn't a one within a mile of this place right now. Listen." The knight doused her light and obeyed. "Nothing's moving out." A bat darted between them, chittering a warning. Startled, the knight and the girl jumped back, and a rope that glowed a sickly yellow-green dropped into the space where Alana had been standing. Noise overhead made Dane look up as she put an arrow on the string. A monstrous spider hurtled down at them. She shot it before she even knew what she fired at. A man screamed above. Black fluid fell onto her hand, burning like acid. She put 2 more arrows into the thing and then jumped aside when it hit the ground. Alana was shouting a warning to the camp. Dane was about to wipe her hand on a leaf when something moved on the edge of her vision. She leaped out of the way and the lioness moved in, as smoothly as butter. Her sword flashed once. A powerful cut sliced 2 of the near legs off a new attacker, then twice, beheading the thing. It happened so fast, Dane wasn't quite sure it happened, till Alana dragged her out of the way of the monster's death throes. Knight and girl waited, breathless, for a moment or two, to see if another giant spider would appear. "I don't think there are more," Dane said at last. "It felt wrong out here before. That's almost gone now." Many jointed legs moved, and she knew the one she'd shot was alive. Gulping down nausea, she drew her dagger and walked around front to kill the thing. Cutting off its head was best. She had thought they were spiders, almost as big as she was, with bodies dressed in dull black fur. That was bad enough, until she saw this one from the front. Head and neck were human, its teeth as sharp and pointed as a giant cat's. It screamed with a man's voice, and raged at seeing the knife. Her mouth dropped open. A cry of frightened pulsion came out as a strangled croak. Her knife dropped from numb fingers. No wonder these felt like storm wings in the night. They were just as wrong, an eerie mating of animal and human that had no reason to exist. Great merciful goddess. Alana came up behind her. It made Dane feel better to know the paleness of the knight's face wasn't due entirely to the light she had held so she could see. Have you heard or seen it? Never. She turned her back on it, let it die slowly, and found a log where she could sit, shuddering in horror. Grandad had told her stories about monsters, human-headed and spider-bodied, named Spidrens. A brave man hunted them best at night, he'd said. Their webs glowed in the dark. A hand rested on her shoulder. Little girl, your ancestors are proud tonight. It was the sentry, the man Hakim. You are the best archer I have ever seen, better even than the lioness. Alana nodded. She knelt beside the thing, examining it with a stick rather than touching it herself. We're lucky you sensed them coming, Dane. The girl swallowed, thinking, you couldn't pay me to touch that, even with a stick. The hedgehogs woke me. They didn't know what was out there. I could feel something wrong was close, but I didn't think it'd look like this. Wincing as the knight pulled the thing's head back by the hair, it was dead now, she added, Grandad told me stories about Spidrens, but he said they were killed ages and ages ago. Not killed. Hakim's voice was steady, but his face glowed with sweat. They were imprisoned in the divine realms 400 years ago, by the greatest of shamans. You mean they're gods? Dane asked, horrified. Immortals and gods are not the same. They just live in the same place. Alana dusted her hands. Like the Stormwings, Dane. They were shed into the divine realms at the same time, along with a great many other creatures, griffins, dragons, and so on. Dane swallowed. There were more of these? What if they were loose too, escaped from the prison where they'd been locked for so long? Horse lords! Anno had found them. Lioness, what? They're called Spidrens. The knight's voice was almost matter-of-fact. Goddess knows how many of us they would have killed and dragged off to munch on if your Dane hadn't been alert. You killed one too, Dane reminded her. She went to the clearing's edge and listened to the woods beyond, just in case. All around she heard creatures stirring, large and small, as they resumed their night's business. I don't know if I'd ever come out of my burrow again, she thought. Remembering an obligation, she glanced behind her. Hakim and Onawa were going over the Spidren, using sticks. Most of the camp had come to watch, and to marvel. One of the soldiers was vomiting at the edge of the clearing, which made her feel better. At least she hadn't thrown up. She faced the trees where the bat had fled after warning them. Thanks, wing friend, she whispered. Thank you for both of us. In the darkness ahead a bat squeaked in reply. Dane smiled and went back to the humans. It's over, she told Alana. The animals are coming out. She felt suddenly exhausted. The burn on her hand throbbed. Onawa put an arm around her. We've both had enough excitement. Come on. She steered her to their fire. Are you all right? She hissed in sympathy when Dane showed her the burn and got her medicines. Dane barely remembered having the burn cleansed and bandaged, she was so tired. The pain gone, she got into bed. You're certain you're all right? The woman was plainly concerned. Dane smiled at her. I think so. The hedgehog snuggled in and around her once more. I'll have nightmares for sure. Me too. Onawa sighed. At least we're alive to have them. She eased into her own bed. What of him? The hawk? The man? Dane pointed at the patient's tent. Onawa smiled. Master Solomon has slept through the whole thing. He'll be mad as fire when he hears too. Spidrens are more his line than ours. Dane said shyly, Why didn't you tell me the truth about the hawk? A sigh came from the other bedroll. His shape-shifting, it's a secret. Only a few people know, and we're not supposed to tell. It isn't that I don't trust you. I do. He's a spy? Only sometimes, when the king's spymaster can't send anyone else. He was just supposed to get well and fly off, and I'd never know. That was the plan. There was a rueful note in Onawa's voice. I know now. Yeah? You plan to tell anybody? Dane thought about that. You just said it's a secret, didn't you? I won't tell. Good. Now go to sleep. No one left the camp by the river the next day. The men of the King's Own burned the dead monsters and searched the woods for more. The lioness and Onawa sat with their patient all morning. In the afternoon they summoned Hakim and another soldier who carried a writing desk. Dane kept out of the way of the men. She wasn't used to being noticed and greeted by so many people. Her caution did not extend to their mounts, of course. Once she'd cared for the ponies, she looked at the big horses. Her favorite was Alana's mount, the young stallion who had greeted her so happily the day before. She examined every inch of him, crooning praises into his ear. I think the feeling's mutual. Dane jumped. Once again the lioness had come up unheard. She grinned at the knight. He's a beauty. His name is Darkmoon. The stallion lipped Alana's breech pockets. He's spoiled, rotten. Fishing a lump of sugar out, she fed it to him. His grandma was my first horse, a fine mare, true to the bone. Giving Darkmoon another sugar lump, she added, You saved my life last night. Dane blushed. You saved mine. Purple eyes are very discomforting when they look at you, she thought. Or is it that she's got so much gift it leaks over to all she does? Where did you learn to shoot like that? My granddad taught me. Carved me that bow, too. You'd think, your size, you'd only be able to manage a smaller one. Dane shrugged. I've always been a fair shot. The woman snorted, but her eyes never left Dane's face. She toyed with the gem around her neck. 3 times you shot overhead and hit a mark that moved in the dark. That's more than fair shooting. Dane shrugged again. I practice a lot. Alana grinned. I'll stop. I didn't mean to interrogate you. I've been so busy getting Aram's story out of him that I forgot I just wanted to say thanks. You saved my life, and the life of one of my best friends. Aram wouldn't be here if you hadn't nursed him. I'll remember it. Dane swallowed. It was no trouble. Alana took her hand. If you need anything, come to me. A place to stay, money, work. I don't care. If I'm not around, go to my husband. Startled, Dane looked at Alana's ring finger and saw a wide silver band. He's the bear in a pirate's swoop. He'll do anything for you that I would. Dane gulped. A king's champion in debt to her? An offer with no limits, and she to apply to the lady or her barren husband? People like her had no business bothering the great and wealthy. And if Alana knew the truth about her, about what she'd done once, she'd hate Dane. She'd have to. The knight must have seen refusal in her face. Promise me. Dane wondered if there was any way to get out of it. Alana had the look of someone who wouldn't let this go, however. I promise, lioness. Alana, Onawa called from the tent, we need you for a minute. Coming, the knight replied. By the way, can you wield a sword? Me? Gods, no, she said, shocked. A sword was a weapon for nobles. The lioness grinned. I shouldn't be glad, but I am. Seeing Dane's puzzlement, she explained, If you were as good with a sword as you are with a bow, I couldn't take the competition. She clapped Dane on the shoulder and returned to her patient. The next day everyone rose at first light, Onawa and Dane from habit, the rest from necessity. You're staying here? Alana wanted to know. Onawa spooned porridge into a bowl and gave it to her. Just for today. Give Aram a little more time before we go west. How about you? I'll see the local magistrate, now I have Aram's information, Alana explained, drizzling honey into her bowl. Once I get a writ of arrest from him, Cynthia's mine. So that's why you were so near when I called for help, said Onawa. Springtime you're usually a pirate's swoop. You were waiting for Aram? Alana nodded. He has proof now that Cynthia is dealing with Karthik. Onawa smiled grimly. I knew it. The knight frowned. I'm sending word to the king to tell him about our visitors last night, and the Stormwings. She shook her head. I can't understand why these immortals are reappearing now. We've had reports from all over Tortle, and from our neighbors as well. Also, I don't like it that they were on hand to chase our friend when he escaped. You don't think it was a coincidence? Onawa asked. Or does Cynthia have an arrangement with those things? Dane winced. The idea of humans welcoming such creatures was chilling. Alana sighed. I don't know. That's one of the questions I'll ask his lordship when I arrest him. In the meantime, I leave you to your travels. Don't let Aram overdo things, and it might be best if he kept from shape-shifting for a while. Not that I think he'll have the strength to try. The knight finished her breakfast and got to her feet. Time to ride. With the consent of the man who tended Darkmoon, Dane brought the saddled horse to his mistress and held him as the lioness mounted. This time the knight wore a leather jerkin studded with metal rings instead of her mail. Seeing Dane look at it, she said, I drew it from our spares. They always bring one in my size. It doesn't look as nice as the mail, but it's more comfortable. She offered Dane a gloved hand to shake. I'll see you again. If not at the palace, then later on. Take care of my friends, and take care of yourself. Dane returned the woman's firm grip. Safe journey, lioness. Give that Cynthia man a few lumps for me. Alana laughed. I hope to do just that. She looked back. The men of the King's Own were in the saddle. Forward! Dane and watched them go. This was what she'd dreamed when Anawa said they were going to Toril. Well, some things are different, she thought, as the riders retreated from view. Pulling the badger's claw out of her shirt, she polished it with a thumb. She's shorter than I expected, and I never thought she'd swear, or make jokes. She's a legend sure enough, but she's so human. An idea made her jaw drop. If she's a legend and a hero, then anyone could be a hero. Tucking the claw back into her shirt, she ran back to camp. If anyone might be a hero, could I? She asked herself, and smiled. No, not me. Still, she mulled it over as she started on a pile of reins that needed mending. Anawa joined her at their fire with leatherwork of her own. They worked quietly until she heard her friend say, "Look who's up." Their patient stood in front of his tent. Someone, Dane assumed one of the men, had given him a shirt and breeches, as well as a pair of boots. She stared up at him. He was 5 inches over 6 feet in height, with broad shoulders and a well-muscled body. His mass of coal-black hair was combed back and tied into a horsetail to show a face that was dark and sensitive. He moved with the ease of a giant cat as he sat on a log beside Anawa, but Dane suspected that he hadn't always been so graceful. As a boy he must have resembled a stork, all elbows and knees. In his late 20s now, he had grown into his looks, and he seemed completely at home with himself. "How'd you find a pair that fits?" Anawa pointed at his feet with the awl she'd been using on her tack. "There's tea in the kettle, and a clean mug right there." His lips parted to reveal white teeth and a shy smile. "Thanks." He poured and blew gently on his tea to cool it. "Alana witched them so they'd fit." He regarded his boots with a wistful grin. "Nobody else had a pair even near big enough." "What about your own magic?" Anawa asked. "I'm dry for the moment. Tapped out." His voice was mid-range for a man's, warm and a little hesitant. Nice to listen to, Dane thought. She kept her eyes away from him as she wrestled with her leather work. A pair of large hands came into her field of vision to hold the strap while she set the final stitches. "Thanks," she whispered, blushing. "You look different." Startled, she looked up into long, shadowy eyes. "What?" He smiled. "You were a lot bigger." She grinned in spite of her shyness. "Seems to me you was a bit smaller, now I think of it." The strap was fixed. He gave it back and returned to his seat on the log. "I'd be dead if it weren't for you. You're called Dane?" She nodded. "I'm glad to meet you, Dane. I'm Numar Salaman." "I thought it was Aram." His eyes flicked to Anawa and back to her. "Aram's my boyhood name. I go by Numar now." Dane took the hint. "The honor's mine, Master Numar." Then, because she had to know, she asked, "Why didn't you change back?" "I was stuck." "Stuck?" "When Cynthia caught me, his mage fed me drugs. I panicked and shapeshifted. I didn't remember I was full of all the drugs it takes to knock out somebody my size." "You're lucky they didn't kill you," Anawa pointed out. "You're right. By the time you found me, I couldn't tell ground from air anymore. The food you offered, I didn't know it was food. Not that I was able to keep anything down." He sipped the tea. "It'll be a long time before I take hawk shape again." "That's why you had funny eyes," breathed Dane, "and that's why you made me dizzy." "I wanted to ask you about that. Anawa says you got sick, disoriented. I can't understand how. She says you don't have the gift." "Odds bobs!" Dane snapped. "Would all her new friends harp on that one thing like Ma? I don't see why this gift is so grand. It comes and goes, you can't do too much at once, and you need all kinds of rules. It's more trouble than it's worth." She got up. "But whenever I turn round, somebody asks if I have it. I'm good with animals. Isn't that enough?" Furious, not knowing there were tears on her cheeks, she stamped off into the woods. Numar looked at Anawa. "What did I say?" The comer sighed and put down her work. Her mother was a hedge witch. She meant someone with basic gifts, taught by other hedge witches, never hoping to be more than village healer midwives. She and Dane's grandfather were killed by raiders in January. She wanted Dane to have the gift, not just whatever she has with animals. Fool woman kept testing her, as if she thought the girl would develop it overnight. "I'd better go after her." "No, when she cools off, I'll go. You and Alana are right. She has real power. Not the gift, though." He tapped a pair of twigs together, looking thoughtful. "It's wild magic, pure and simple. She's brimming with it. I've never seen a human with so much." "You felt it, then?" He smiled. "I felt it when I was a bird, half crazy and dying." Anua sighed. Be careful with her, Aram. She's hurting. I will. He rose, unfolding his length with a groan. Use Numar, would you? I know you trust Dane, but there's no telling who else might overhear. I still have enemies in Carthage who'd like to know where I am. Anua made a face. You're right, Numar. He grinned. Come on, what kind of great sorcerer has a name like Aram Draper? I have to have a name to fit my calling, don't you think? All you mages are players at heart, I swear. Can't do the magic unless you have all kinds of robes and props and a big audience to cheer you. She waved him off and returned to her work, smiling. Numar found Dane greeting a woodchuck and stayed in the trees to watch. The girl lay on the ground, her eyes on a level with the chuck's. The animal stood on his hind legs, chattering to her. She giggled, then offered a hand. The chuck snuggled against it for a moment. Then he chirped a farewell and trotted off into the brush. Numar came forward slowly. He seemed to have a lot to say. Dane was thinking about the chuck, how nice he was after the monsters 2 nights before. Oh, it's the usual spring talk, freshening up the burrow, getting nice-smelling leaves. I told him where to find some wild mint. Her memory returned, and she felt her cheeks get hot. Master Numar, He smiled. No offense taken, if you stop calling me master. If I'm to help with the ponies the rest of the way, we may as well use first names. Is Anua mad at me? For losing my temper? He shook his head. The motion popped open the tie that held his black locks, and it fell. God's bless it! Dane came to help him look. By the time they found the tie, she'd forgotten to be nervous with him. It's easier if you wet it before using it on your hair, she explained as they returned to camp. When it dries, then it shrinks. Good advice. Your hair gives you trouble? Oh, goddess, my hair's so dratted thick I don't even bother with ties. She giggled suddenly. This is a very strange talk we're having. He grinned down at her. Boys worry just as much about their looks as girls do. We only hide it better. Seriously? She asked, delighted. Living with only Granda and Ma, away from the males of the village, she began to think young men were totally alien. Seriously, he assured her. You should see the lotions I put on my hair to get it to behave. He winked at Anua when they reached the campfire. Anua and Dane spent the next day exercising the ponies and practicing hand-to-hand combat, something Anua said a woman alone should know. Numar dozed, mended his spare shirt, or did exercises with the arm that had been broken. Is he up to the road? Dane asked during one of his naps. She kept her voice low. He was stretched out under a nearby tree. He maybe should ride, but he's too big for the ponies. We'll take it easy, the Khmer replied. Alana laid a slow healing on him to fix the arm and build his strength. She said in 2 or 3 days he'll be fine. Did you know him from before? We're old friends. Seeing the look on Dane's face, Anua said, Not that kind of friend. He goes for shapely blondes, and I like a man that likes horses. No, our hawk took pity on me when I didn't know anyone but the Queen and Bury. If he likes you, he's the best of friends. Horse lords help you if you get on his bad side. Seeing that Dane looked puzzled, she explained, Well, he is the most powerful sorcerer in Tortle. Dane stared. A boyish man who talked hair ties? Looking over, she saw a butterfly hovering over Numar's long nose. Him? Anua chuckled. Yes, him. It takes a powerful gift to shape change. Numar opened his eyes. You're talking about me, I can tell. He's vain, too, Anua said loudly. He takes as much time to dress for court functions as any lady, which is bad enough, but then he ruins his clothes sitting on the grass to watch meteor showers. But that's my good side, protested Numar. You really should tell her some of my faults. He paused, then added, Then again, please don't. I forgot you actually know my flaws. Dane laughed. She could see the rest of the trip would be fun. The adults were arguing about protective circles when she began to think of supper. It wasn't fair to let Anua hunt all the time. Like her predator friends, Dane ate meat, taking care to make her kill swift and clean. Now she got hooks and line and told the adults where she would be. There was a big tree on the river bank where she could sit and mind her lines in comfort, and Anua had a very good way of preparing trout. It wasn't long before her lines were baited and set in the deep pool under the tree. With the hard part done, she watched the sky and daydreamed, rousing herself only to greet the animals who came to say hello. Cloud found a nearby patch of clover and grazed, keeping her company. Tahai joined them, looking disgusted. He lay down where Dane could easily scratch his ears. Anua and Numar were doing the sitting thing, not talking or working or paying attention to him. It bored him silly. What's the sitting thing? Dane asked. The dog showed her an image in his mind. Onawa, seated with her legs crossed, hands resting on her knees, eyes closed. To that picture he added Numer, doing the same thing. A shimmering, pearly light gleamed around each of them, rippling over their faces. "What's that?" Dane asked him. "That light there?" Tahoe didn't know. It was a thing some humans had and others didn't. "Magic," Cloud said. "Your dam had it, and some of the others back home. Not so bright as these two, more like a glitter. But it's magic, all right." "Onawa only does the sitting thing with humans that have the light," Tahoe commented, and sighed. The girl smiled. "Find a stick. I'll play with you. Not here, though. I don't want to scare the fish." Tahoe wagged his tail and hunted for a stick that wouldn't hurt his mouth. "Cloud, do I have the light inside?" "No," the mare replied. "The light's only for humans. You may look like a human, but you aren't. You're of the people, the folk of claw and fur, wing and scale." "Impossible," the girl said flatly. "Look at me. I'm pink, my fur is patchy, I walk on two legs. I'm human. Human all over." "On the outside," the pony insisted. "Not inside. Inside your people." Tahoe brought a stick, and Dane went to play with him. Cloud was joking, of course. She was human. Ma would have told her if she weren't. They left their camp the next day. Onawa set an easy pace, stopping twice in the morning to rest. Numer kept up without appearing to tire. Catching Dane's eye on him once, he thumped himself on the chest and said, "When the lioness puts a healing on a man, he stays healed." "Does your ma know you're this silly?" she demanded tartly. He nodded, comically sad. "Few gray hairs she has on her head are my doing. But," with an exaggerated change of mood, "I send her plenty of money so she can pay to have them dyed." "I hope she beat you as a child," Onawa grumbled. The day passed quickly. Numer and Onawa told stories about the people they knew at the palace. The man even chuckled for her, a most unmage-like feat. By the time they made camp, she felt she had known him for years. Building their fire, she ran into trouble. No matter what she did with flint and steel, the wood was too damp to catch. At last she coaxed it into a tiny flame and held her breath. "How does it go?" he asked over her shoulder, and the flame went out. "God's bless it!" she snapped. "What's the matter?" "Oh, they must have had rain here yesterday. Everything's damp." "Sit back." She did as she was told, and the tinder burst into flame. She had to put large sticks of wood on it fast before the fire used up the tinder. "But you didn't point or make circles or chant anything." He shrugged. "Some people need those things. I don't." She gasped at his arrogance. "Well, excuse me for breathing." His laugh was full-throated and made her grin. "What, did they have to enact fire-making rituals before anything would burn where you came from?" Her spirits dropped. "Things burned easy back home," she said flatly. "Real easy." She'd been having a good time while her family lay in the ground. Grabbing the shovel, she went to dig the latrine. Teeth dug into the mage's elbow, making him yelp. He looked down at his attacker, Cloud. "Stop that, or I'll light a fire under your tail." The mare squeezed a little harder and released his arm. It was going so well. Onawa was grooming the ponies. She laughed. Numer rubbed his elbow. He'd gotten off lightly. Cloud had only barely nicked the skin. "She'll laugh again." Dane kept to herself, and the adults left her alone, talking quietly. When cleanup was done, they did the sitting thing. It was as Tahoe had shown her. With eyes closed and legs crossed they sat, hands on their knees, breathing as if they were asleep. In fact, Dane went to sleep watching them. That night it came to her that Ma and Granddad probably wouldn't mind if she had fun now and then. They'd been partial to fun, making berry strings or playing catch with the bread dough. In her packs were two of the dancing puppets Granddad had made her for her birthdays, the horse and the one that looked just like Ma. The others had been ruined, but she had saved these. She got up in the morning with caution and sent the raccoon and the marten who had spent that night with her on their way. She hated apologies, but if Onawa and Numer were angry, she would make some. Luck was on her side. Their grouchiness seemed to be normal morning grouchiness. All they wanted to do was drink their tea, eat their food, and get moving. Dane let it go at that. If they weren't angry about how she'd behave, why remind them? They made good progress that day. Once supper and clean-up were done, Numer stretched. "Let's go, Onawa. You won't improve without practice." Dane knew what came next. "What's the sitting thing?" They looked at her blankly. "You know, what you're going to do now?" "Meditation," Numer said. "It clears the mind and rests it. If you have the gift, meditation helps your discipline." His eyes were thoughtful as they rested on her. Would you like to learn?" "I don't have the gift." Was he going to start on that again? He shrugged. "It's not only for the gifted. I told you, it rests the mind. It helps you get a grip on the way you think." "It helps you decide what you want," Anna added, "and how to get it." Dane scuffed her foot in the dust. "Is it hard?" Both of them smiled. "You won't know till you try," Nimmer pointed out. Dane shrugged and sat as they did, tailor style. "Now what?" "Hands on your knees. Sit straight. Close your eyes. Let the thoughts empty out. For tonight that's enough. Just let your thoughts go." Dane heard Tahoe sigh. Now he had no one to play with. The next morning they weren't far from their camp when riders overtook them on the road, Alana and men of the King's Own. Dane was startled to see that the lioness, so friendly before, was now pale with fury. Darkmoon was as angry as his mistress. He pranced and fidgeted until Dane went to his head. He calmed slowly under her hands. "He's gone," the knight told them. "From the looks of it, he fled the minute he knew you were safe. Curse him, those dungeons of his." "I know," whispered Numer. He looked suddenly tired. "I don't understand," Anna protested. "You searched?" "We did." Alana rubbed her neck. "His servants claim Stormwings came with a box, like a seat and chair. They flew off with him in it." "Then they can be talked to," Numer said. "They're intelligent." "Sure they are," Dane said. "They talked to Anna and me in the marsh." "She's right," the Khmer told them, "and they searched for Numer and Patterns after they lost him." The lioness sighed. "Lovely! More fun! All right, we have to see the king. Come along as soon as you can now. Be sure to ward your camp at night." "We'll do fine," Numer told her. "See you at the palace." The knight and Hakim nodded, and within a few moments the company was galloping out of sight. 4 mornings later Anna and her companions topped a rise, and Dane thought her eyes would fall from her head. Before them a river halved a valley that cupped a walled city, and more houses than she could count. At the heart of the valley 3 bridges linked the northern and southern banks. The roads entered the city from every angle. In the west the city broke through its wall to climb a long slope dotted with estates and temples. Above everything stood a huge castle shielded by high walls. Its towers, flying bright-colored flags, shone in the early sun. A small dome placed among them glowed silver like a giant pearl. Black dots like ants climbed a broad, white-paved road from the city below, to scatter before the walls and stream in through several gates. "That's the palace," Numer said, "home of the most unusual royal couple in all history and their peculiar court." "I don't think 'unusual' and 'peculiar' are the right words," protested Anua, and Toai barked agreement. "Do you live here?" Dane asked the man. He shook his head. "I live south, along the coast. They have rooms for me here, though." He looked at Anua. "Press on?" She nodded. Their road took them around the city until they reached a bridge over a deep moat. Here the palace wall was only 10 feet high. The gate was a simple affair of wood and iron. Inside lay a small town, its air scented with molten copper, pine, cows, and baking. All this, Numer said, supported the palace. Dane shook her head in awe. Guards in maroon and beige waved them across the bridge. Inside the gate, Numer pointed at the palace. "I go that way. I need to report in." Tears stung Dane's eyes. "You knew he'd leave some time," she scolded herself. "This is it. Don't be a baby. He's got important things to do." A big hand patted her shoulder. "Just for now," the man said quietly. "I'll see you again soon." Anua grinned when he kissed her cheek. "You just can't wait to lay hands on your books again. I know that look in your eye." "She does, too," Numer admitted. "Take care of our Dane." He waved and headed toward the palace, hands in his pockets. "Come on," Anua told her. "It's this way." Following her out of the gate's inner yard, Dane saw more wonders. Around them soared the levels of the palace, with wings and turrets in many styles telling of additions over time. She saw more glass in a look than she'd seen in her life. Her nose smelled flowers, both plain and exotic. Her ears were filled with creaking wagons, shouting people, and the clang of metal. Anua led them downhill. Chief among the buildings they passed were large stables, rich with horse smells. Dane would have stopped there, but Anua walked on. Before them lay meadows dotted with grazing animals. Behind the herds were masses of trees. "The royal forest," said the Khmer. The road ended at the meadows, where 2 long wooden buildings had been built. One was a stable, a neat and quiet one. The other, connected to the stable by a covered walk, was a 2-story barracks. Before it was a tall pole, a flag at its tip. As if showing the banner off, the wind lifted it up with a pop. A red horse reared on a gold-brown field. "The Queen's Riders," said Onawa. "Home, or at least as much of one as I need. Let's put the ponies in the meadow, and then we'll talk."